Have you ever wondered if your favorite video game is truly a masterpiece? Or is it just nostalgia tainting your perception? Welcome to our first episode of Nostalgia versus Reality, where we dive deep into gaming history to see if those classics still hold up to today's standards. We're kicking this series off with what is considered to be a true classic, The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. This game is often hailed as one of the greatest, but does it still deserve that title today? Let's find out. Released in 1998 on the N64, Ocarina of Time was a game changer. It marked Link's first step from 2D adventuring into a vast new 3D experience, introducing revolutionary mechanics like Z-targeting, cinematic cutscenes, and a dynamic day and night cycle that affected gameplay, character behaviors, and events. But does it still hold up today against modern titles? Let's break it down Triforce piece by Triforce piece. First up, game mechanics. Ocarina of Time introduced Z-targeting, which was mind-blowing at the time for 10-year-old me. Utilizing the N64 controller, the Z-targeting system made combat more fluid and intuitive. But fast forward to today, and while Z-targeting is still effective, manual camera control can be, well, awkward, sometimes even painful, and definitely not as seamless as we would like. Tight spaces, poor angles, it can lead to some frustrating moments, whether you're in the heat of battle or just navigating tricky platform sections. But overall, the gameplay is still solid, even if it could be a bit clunky by modern standards. We'll target a solid 3.5 out of 5 hearts. Now let's talk about that menu system. Oh boy. While it's still functional, it can still feel clunky and cumbersome by today's standards. The C-pad on the N64 controller was intended to streamline weapons and item management, but for Link's equipment, well, let's just say it has its flaws. Equipping your iron boots, pause. Unequipping them, pause again. Watching Link slowly sink to the bottom of the water temple over and over again was like watching grass grow, but in slow motion. It was awful. Link may have survived, but our brain cells surely didn't. The menu system has some glaring flaws, but it's still overall functional, so it gets a 3 out of 5 hearts. How can we have a review of Ocarina of Time without talking about the actual ocarina? Using the ocarina to play songs isn't just a clever gameplay element, but also a brilliant narrative device. Learning these tunes adds a whole new layer of interaction. Playing the correct song in the right spot could unlock story progression, hidden secrets, and maybe even that life-saving fairy. And as you progress further into the game, you'll acquire warp songs that transport Link to specific locations across Hyrule, serving as the game's fast travel system, which greatly cuts down travel time and exploration. The composer Koji Kondo really knew what he was doing when creating these unforgettable songs. I still find myself humming Zelda's Lullaby from time to time. The ocarina composes a solid 5 out of 5 hearts, a perfect score. The Horseback Mechanics were introduced for the first time in the Zelda series, with Epona making her debut as Link's first horse. Summoned with a melody from Link's ocarina, Epona provided players with both transportation across the newly discovered 3D world and introduced riding combat. The game implemented a limited carrot system to manage the horse's stamina, allowing her to sprint faster. However, once depleted, she would slow down until her stamina was restored. For combat, Link could ready his bow, allowing the player to shoot while riding. But the implementation has its flaws. Without using the Z targeting system, precise aiming was nearly impossible on the N64 joystick. Another drawback was Epona would slow down when Link would aim his bow, causing you to lose any momentum chasing down your target. Another downside was riding combat was only utilized for side objectives and minimal storytelling. Let's face it, the only thing we really cared about riding combat for was to shoot down those rare poes in Hyrule Fields to collect that coveted 4th bottle. We'll grade in carrots for Epona and give the old girl a 4 out of 5. Alright, let's talk dungeons. They're a blend of combat, exploration, and puzzles, though some might feel simpler compared to today's games. We're not going to go through every dungeon here today, but I'd like to highlight a fan favorite, and, well, one that most gamers absolutely despise. The Forest Temple. The Forest Temple is the first dungeon you tackle in Ocarina of Time, and it's definitely a fan favorite. Hidden deep within the Lost Woods, this temple is known for its eerie atmosphere and haunting music. Back in the day, the Forest Temple was mind-blowing. The moment you walk in, you're greeted by that haunting melody and twisted hallways. The atmosphere was immersive and creepy, giving the player an understanding of what Ganondorf has achieved in this reality. Who could forget shooting those pose in the paintings, the twisting corridors that mess with your sense of direction, or that strange severed hand dropping down on Link? That sound still gives me super bad anxiety. Not to mention that boss fight with Phantom Ganon was a real adrenaline rush. testing your combat skills and Z targeting expertise. Fast forward to today. How does the Forest Temple fare? Well, the atmosphere is still top notch. The music and design create a genuine spooky vibe that's hard to beat. However, some of the mechanics feel, well, dated. Twisted hallways, while innovated back then, can feel more like a gimmick that disrupts the flow rather than enhances it. The combat with Phantom Ganon remains a highlight, but the Z targeting and camera angles can sometimes make it more frustrating than fun. The puzzles in the Forest Temple are a mix of clever and awkward. On one hand, you have creative puzzles like the Poe Sisters, which require you to think and explore. But on the other hand, some puzzles can feel a bit tedious, especially with the dated controls and camera issues. Overall, the Forest Temple remains a memorable and atmospheric dungeon that holds up fairly well, though it does show its age in certain areas. It's a gem that still shines even if it's a bit rough around the edges. The Water Temple. Just hearing that name is enough to send shivers down the spine of any Zelda fan. Submerged in the center of Lake Hylia, this dungeon is known for its complex design, endless backtracking, and those dreaded iron boots. Back in the day, it was a nightmare to navigate, but does it still deserve its notorious reputation? Yes it does. Okay, let's rewind to the first time we tackled the Water Temple. The first thing that hits you is the sheer complexity of this place. The changing of water levels, the intricate layouts, and the constant need to switch between normal boots and iron boots. For many of us, it just sucked. Fast forward to today, how does the Water Temple hold up? Spoiler alert, it's still a nightmare. The atmosphere is there, but the tedious mechanics are even more glaring by today's standards. The constant pausing to switch boots is a momentum killer, and the water level mechanics are just as convoluted as you remember. Navigating the temple often feels like a chore, with confusing pathways and repetitive tasks that sap the fun out of the experience. Don't forget, this dungeon also features the infamous battle against Dark Link. In addition to the temple's already lengthy challenges, Dark Link proved to be a challenging foe with his ability to mimic and counter Link's moves, making the fight unpredictable and frustrating. Sticking to the dungeon's theme of annoying, tedious, and laborious. The puzzles in the Water Temple are designed to test your patience more than your brain. Sure, there are moments of clever design, but they're overshadowed by the constant backtracking and the clunky interface. Adjusting water levels to access new areas sounds intriguing, but in practice, it's a tedious exercise that disrupts the flow of the game. Overall, the Water Temple remains one of the most frustrating dungeons in gaming history. While it has its moments, the tedious mechanics and confusing layout make it a chore to play through. It's a gamer's nightmare that unfortunately has not aged well at all. It has been over 25 years for me, and I still wake up in a cold sweat thinking about this place. With the only real outlier being the dreaded Water Temple, the game did a fantastic job conceptualizing these dungeons. Each dungeon features smart designs and themed challenges that test your skills and puzzle solving abilities. So with that said, 4 out of 5 hearts dungeons, good job. Except for you, Water Temple, nobody likes you. Next up, graphics. In 1998, these visuals were top tier. Hyrule Field felt vast and alive. The character models though, well, polygonal. Today those same graphics might remind you of a blocky nightmare. Polygons in general just don't age well. But here's the thing, Ocarina of Time is one of those outliers where the art direction still shines. By utilizing fully 3-dimensional backgrounds, really kept the game from feeling dated. While other games at the time relied on 3D player models against a 2D background, Ocarina of Time approach set it apart. The world design is immersive, the dungeons are distinct, and the overall aesthetic still has its charm. It would be unfair to compare this game to Breath of the Wild or any other modern-day Zelda titles since they clearly have a technological advantage. But for its time, it was a massive leap for both the Zelda franchise and other adventure games to follow. So 4 out of 5 hearts, just because who the hell thought this looked good? Grab your ocarina and let's explore the Temple of Time as we dive into the game's story and characters. This game serves up classic hero's journey with a side of time travel. And who doesn't love a good time travel mechanic when done right? Well, that's for another episode. Anyways, Link's ability to swap between child and adult forms, embarking on his quest to rescue Princess Zelda and Hyrule from the evil Ganondorf, remained incredibly satisfying even by today's standards. Each character has its clear motivations, yet, despite being a 3D game, the characters lack depth. Zelda seeks to save the kingdom, Ganondorf plots to rule over Hyrule, and where is Link? Smack dab in the middle, of course. We're introduced to Link's first ever horse, the lovable Epona. Alongside Epona, there are various side characters who play roles in Link's journey, like the mischievous and wisecracking Skull Kid, the mysterious Sheep, and the quirky mask salesman, to name a few. While these characters add flavor and moments of interaction to the game, their impact remains somewhat one-dimensional despite the game's 3D environment. For instance, Sheik serves as a guide and mentor figure for Link, guiding him through his quest with wisdom and mysterious powers, while the masked salesman presents an eerie and unsettling presence tied to side quests involving Transformation Mask. Other than plot-driven interactions, they really serve no other purpose. But then there's that owl. This owl is one of the most frustrating, irritating characters I have ever encountered in a video game. Every time you cross its path, brace yourself for a mandatory monologue that lasts way longer than it should. You will trap Link in these unskippable dialogues, often recapping parts of the story we just played through. I understand that the owl was meant to be an early guide for Link, but his presence really disrupts the game's pacing and sense of urgency. As annoying as the owl is, Link has someone worse to deal with, his fairy guide, Navi, who hovers above from the very start of the game. Navi will constantly interrupt your gameplay with unsolicited advice or reminders. This can happen during combat, exploration, or puzzle solving. And if you try to ignore her, she'll just dance around Link and persistently yell,
"Hey, listen, hey, hey, hey,"
at you until you acknowledge her. We give the character and story 3.5 hearts. Just please don't tell the owl. So, nostalgia versus reality. What's the verdict? Ocarina of Time is undeniably a product of its time, with some mechanics and visuals that haven't really aged perfectly. But here's the kicker, it's still a blast to play. The sense of adventure, groundbreaking narrative, and unforgettable music all combine to create an experience that's still enjoyable, even by today's standards. So after examining Zelda's Ocarina of Time without our rose-colored glasses, we give it 4 out of 5 hearts. In the end, Ocarina of Time stands the test of time. Sort of. While it may not score a perfect 10 out of 10 by today's standards, it still deserves revisiting every now and then. Nostalgia certainly plays a role in creating fond memories of our favorite games. In this Zelda game, it's no different. Ocarina of Time still remains a monumental title in gaming history, offering a timeless and fulfilling experience. So whether you're dusting off that old cartridge or firing up that emulator, relive the legend. So, do you agree with our nostalgia rating for Zelda Ocarina of Time? What memorable game would you like us to discuss next? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the next episode of Nostalgia versus Reality. Maybe your favorite game will be next. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.